Here we see a Ukrainian vampire drone carrying a very interesting payload. What that is, you'll find out in the situation report. May 26, 2026, we are in the 5th year, yes, and it's day 92 since the start of the full-scale invasion. A warm welcome. Welcome to the situation report. In today's report, we will take a look at how the situation at the front has developed over the past few months. We will also take a look at the Russian airstrike on Kiev that took place a few days ago. And what we will also look at are some very interesting attacks or explosions that are very mysterious and complex, taking place in the Russian hinterland, as well as much more. New footage apparently shows the shooting down of a Russian Kh-101 cruise missile during the last major attack on Kiev. After being hit, the cruise missile crashed, but its warhead apparently did not detonate immediately. And this once again shows how dangerous intercepted flying objects can still be. Even if air defense prevents the missile from reaching its intended target, debris or intact warheads, as in this case during the crash, can still cause massive damage. It's also interesting that the Kh-101 continues to be one of Russia's most important precision cruise missiles. These cruise missiles are usually launched from strategic bombers at great distances and are intended to bypass Ukrainian air defenses in a way that's as difficult to predict as possible. At the same time, every single impact makes it clear again how stressful the ongoing large-scale attacks on cities like Kiev remain, even when most of the rockets are intercepted. At the same time, every single impact also makes it clear how stressful these ongoing large-scale attacks on cities like Kiev remain. Currently, and we saw this during the last attack, only 11 out of 35 cruise missiles were intercepted, which is due to the Patriot interceptor missile shortage. Let's take a look at this large section of the front, which stretches here in the east from the direction of Soledar, down through Kostiantynivka, all the way to Pokrovsk, right here at this point. Because this is where the Russian offensive is taking place, with the goal of meeting up somewhere back here and capturing the entire area here in the Donbass. Here's the Donbass. I'll trace it with the mouse so it's visible. It still runs through here at this point, and this is all territory that the Ukrainians have fortified extremely well and that the Russians want to capture, since it is also one of their war objectives. And so they decided to launch an offensive mainly from the direction of Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, they attempted to attack westward from here, planning to eventually meet again nearby, and then to capture this entire area here with the two really big cities, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, which are the last major cities in the region, but we don't really see much of that happening. I read in the Laja live stream comments section that someone asked whether the Russian offensive has already ended. Despite months of Russian attacks and a massive commitment of forces, the Russian advances have been surprisingly limited overall since the beginning of the year. Especially the originally large pincer movements I just mentioned are making hardly any operational progress. Meanwhile, Russia's situation there seems to be worsening in some areas. North of Lyman, Russian forces recently lost ground as Ukrainians launched a counterattack. That's how it began. Although they were able to deploy mechanized forces for this attack there at all, Russian drones in this sector must have apparently been at least partially suppressed. And that could be one of the most important points of all. For months, the Russian defense of many front sectors has relied heavily on drones. If Ukraine starts to break this dominance locally, opportunities for classic mechanized movements suddenly arise again. Southeast, or rather, northeast of Lyman, Ukraine seems to be further dissolving its lead. Russian gains from the first months of 2026 are said to have been partially lost there again. In terms of area, this is limited, but operationally it is quite relevant, because this very front arc remains important for Russian attack plans towards Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. And this fits remarkably well with the increasing Russian complaints about Ukrainian drone superiority in certain sections of the front. Above all, Russian mill bloggers are now speaking more and more openly about the lack of drones, inadequate reconnaissance, and problems securing their front lines. We covered that in the situation report. Also, in last week's situation report, we saw that the Russians have concentrated enormous forces around Pokrovsk. According to Ukrainian sources, That's 100,000 soldiers. That's nice for them. But there's hardly any progress here. That doesn't mean Russia isn't making any advances at all or is losing on every front. No, quite the opposite. But it shows that progress is now not only extremely slow, but in some areas it's even going backwards. And that's despite the large number of troops. Here's a quick statement from our chancellor regarding the latest major Russian airstrike on Kyiv last night. On Pentecost Sunday, Russia massively attacked targets in Ukraine. And that's correct. Once again, the Airstrikes missile system was used. That is also correct, but it shows that the chancellor's advisor and/or the chancellor have no idea about this system, and especially not about its effects. I think both of them assume that large-scale damage was actually caused here. If he had written, drones were used again or cruise missiles were used again, then that might have been a more relevant statement. But this sounds as if they just took the first headline from some gossip magazine, where this thing is advertised as a world-destroying wonder weapon. After that comes a filler, in which the federal government, as always, whenever something happens in the world, just strongly condemns it while doing nothing about it. And then there's another statement that they're on Ukraine's side. That's true in the end, but you could almost have left out the middle part. If you condemn but don't act, then nobody cares anyway. Where is the promised Taurus cruise missile, by the way? That would be a good response to the action, meaning the large airstrike. That would be ideal now, as Ukraine can put heavy drone pressure on the land supply route, and the Kerch Bridge could once again become a relevant target after months, since the so-called road of life is turning into a road of death, at least for Russian logistics. Let's take a look at that now. Ukraine seems to have started making important roads in the occupied southern Ukraine impassable with heavy Vampire drones. And in doing so, they attach caltrops to chains, which are then dropped over heavily used roads. A little fun fact on the side, do you know why they're hollow everywhere? Many vehicles, especially those from the military sector, have self-sealing tires, as they say. If you drive over a sharp object, the rubber gets penetrated and the tire still seals itself. That means you don't get a flat right away. But if the object itself is a hollow tube, the air still escapes. That's a small but important detail. Especially along logistical routes, videos are appearing more and more frequently in which Russian vehicles, convoys, or even individual drones are being deliberately targeted. We also saw this in the Laga livestream. Here you can see new current footage. We have new footage from this area almost every day, and this video here is also particularly interesting. A Russian interceptor drone is apparently trying to pursue a Ukrainian Vampire drone. You can even see the caltrop chains hanging down here. And during the interception attempt, it flies directly into the dangerous payload and crashes. A Russian interceptor drone also tried to intercept a real stork that was circling in the sky over Ukraine. At the last moment, the bird suddenly made a sharp turn and actually managed to escape from the drone. I honestly don't know how you could mistake a white stork for a Ukrainian drone, unless it was intentional. At the same time, the video shows just how absurd and tense the situation has become. Anything that moves in the sky now seems to be considered a potential target. Once again, an important piece of Russian energy infrastructure is on fire. This time, the Intexchem oil depot in Kandry. What's particularly interesting here isn't the fire itself, but rather its connection to the recent explosion at the oil depot in Nolino. Also, two major incidents within a short period, same region, similar logistical area, and both times without any drone reports. And that's exactly what makes it interesting now. The Republic is deep in the Russian hinterland and far from the actual front. Important parts of the Russian fuel and supply system run through there, which would normally be considered relatively safe. But if oil and fuel facilities regularly fail or burn even there, that automatically raises questions. Is there sabotage going on here? Or is it more likely to be overload and poor maintenance within Russia's war machine? Or maybe even a combination of both at the same time? Share your opinion in the comments. Yesterday, Russia apparently destroyed a warehouse of the UN World Food Program in Dnipro with an Iskander missile. The depot contains humanitarian aid supplies for residents of the frontline areas. According to reports, there was enough supply here for about 130,000 people. The damage amounts to about $1.4 million. The attack is, as always, politically sensitive. This is not about an alleged military target, but about international humanitarian infrastructure of the United Nations. Food that was actually intended for civilians near the front was practically completely destroyed. What is particularly absurd by now is also how routine such reports have become, and the reaction of many bloggers, including myself because I share the same reaction. Because most people already know how the UN will react: statements, deep concern, condemnations, and then nothing really happens. Just like recently with the attack on the convoy using kamikaze drones. Moscow has long since factored in that risk. For years, Russia has been testing how far it can go with attacks on civilian or international infrastructure without having to fear serious consequences. And I would like to keep referring back to the post by the posting chancellor. Doing nothing or strongly condemning it is almost the same thing in the end. It just projects weakness and no ability to act. Before we finish, many people immediately think of a Japanese airplane when they hear kamikaze. But did you know that the Wehrmacht also planned and in some cases even used its own suicide weapons? And that some of these systems seem shockingly modern when compared to today's drones? That's exactly what I made a video about. Be sure to check it out. Many will be surprised by how much from back then feels relevant today. Thank you to all subscribers, channel members, and the Algin crew. I especially want to thank Lieutenant Colonels Renicky, Silla, Dietrich, Freddy, and Meyerhofer. Feel free to subscribe, like, leave comments, and see you in the next situation report.